Next, we have Brian Schoen, Deputy Director of Planning and Natural Resources, gracious enough to come and see us. I sent an email to him on September 26th, and he responded that he'd like to come and meet with us. This is not like a big session, he's here to fill us in on what's happening, and at the end we'll ask him questions, so keep it, under 5 minutes, 3 minute questions. So this is basically information gathering, and I appreciate you being here.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to see everybody face to face. I'd much rather do this than back and forth with email, so appreciate that. And I'm just going to do, I'm not sure, I'll give you a little bit of background. So I work in planning and natural resources, and from a planning perspective, and again, I apologize if you guys know all this stuff, and you probably do. I know George does, but we have about 4 specific documents that we deal with in planning, which include our system-wide plan, which is our big 5-year plan that we update every 5 years, kind of sets the stage for what we do as an organization. Then we have individual master plans for each park. So Jockey's Ridge has a master plan for the park. We also have what we call general management plans. And those are kind of, try to update those about every 5 years. And those ones kind of, obviously, master plan's 25-year plus vision for the park, and you want to update that as you get projects done, as things change, as priorities change. We go back in about every 5 years and update those. And I don't know if you guys we've done presentations for them at any of those documents here or in the past, but typically we try to include the friends and the park advisory groups in that process. So those are typically updated every 5 years, and then the other ones that we do are small area plans. So if there's something going in that may not be in the plan, we have some landscape architects on staff that can go in there and kind of draw those things out. Things change. Hey, we need this, or this is something we need to look at. We'll do those plans. So that's kind of our planning process that we do, kind of big picture. And so I say that to say, the Rogallo has come to us with a request. So since that is not in any of our plans, we want to come to you guys and say, here's a request that we have, get input on it, because it does not appear right now in any of our plans. So we want to make sure that you guys have some input into that process. So, again, you guys know that we use our friends groups to help us make those decisions and get input on projects to help us protect the resources. And then, I'll be honest with you, and I apologize for some of this. I don't have sort of the specific dates, but I know around 3 years ago we were contacted by the Rogallo Foundation to discussion of the museum. And frankly, I was not involved directly in any of those conversations at that time, so I'm a little new to this, so bear with me a little bit. But I think you guys at least had talked about it. You have it wasn't a presentation here about it. I'm getting some yes.
There was. They came to the Friends group.
Okay.
And presented it to us.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and that's fine. But we're down that road, so we want to come back and reinitiate that discussion. And I'm not going to talk about the project because if you want those details about it, I would encourage you to talk to them. It's not our design. All I know is the only specifics I have is what's on their website, which is the Evoke Studios, the same group that did the design work for them. So have you guys seen those?
Yes, sir.
Drawing and renderings, where that is, etc. So again, essentially, what we would do is come to you guys, which we're doing today, talk about the projects and see what questions you have. That's kind of what we would do. And to talk specifically, again, about 3 years ago, this came back. And so where are we at in the process? Because I know there's been a lot of questions about that. So typically, if somebody came to us with a lease agreement, we have several of those in the park system that we manage, and they may vary everything from and I don't know this, but I assume is the water a lease agreement we have with
the sound side.
Yeah. So
yeah.
that is a lease agreement in place with with them to put the wells in. So there's a lease agreement there that was put in place. And the typical process for that would be, they come to the park. There was a discussion on sort of what the specifics would be about that, and sort of a back and forth. Usually one of our attorneys would draft, get a draft lease agreement. That would be then go to the basically through the department for internal review, through that and sign off from our secretary. So that's where a lease agreement would go, and then it would go to the state property office. And so we as a state agency don't have the ability to sign off on leases, purchase land, any of those things. That's all done through the state property office and through the real property group. And so we have a full-time staff that we hire and works out of that office, and they handle all of our land acquisition and lease agreements. And so that would go to them. They would review it, reviewed internally by their attorney, and then from there it would get on the council of state agenda for review and approval. And then if it was approved by the council of state, an agenda item, then it goes to Secretary of State for governor's signature. So that's the process. And so where we're at in that process, and I think there's been some misinformation, there's no draft lease, there's no signing. I can't, the governor signs leases, I don't sign leases.
Right.
So just so people understand that, I wouldn't, I think I heard that I was coming to sign a lease, which I would never do, because it's the governor's job. And so, and that hasn't gone through that process, or we don't have a draft lease agreement in place either. So that's kind of where we're at in that process. So wanted to clarify that a little bit. And then, from, a process, again, I think there was some comments about, different documents that could be done, EIS, NEPA, all those documents. And so, we certainly could discuss those, what folks would like to see, or what their concerns would be, or how those could be addressed, or, traffic studies or anything like that. And again, those would be things that we could put in an agreement with anybody, or, whatever the decision would be made. So from the division standpoint, we're in the initial data gathering phase. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for input from you. Again, we don't have a lot of information on the, we have that general schematic of what that thing looks like, where it's located, and so that's kind of where we're at in the process. Let's see. And again, I'd be happy to talk about the environmental documents, but I would I would sort of think more of, what do you want to know? Because if we say we're going to do an EIS, an EIS is a part of the state, North Carolina State Environmental Policy Act, and that has some specific criteria. The minimum criteria for, which was changed a few years back, is essentially $10 million of state funding or 10 acres of disturbance. So that's a pretty big minimum criteria for an environmental assessment. Like I said, I did environmental assessments. I worked as an environmental review coordinator for the state for a number of years for state parks, and I did several of them. Every visitor center we did one, but those now don't fall under the SEPA minimum criteria anymore. So that's been a change in policy over the years from Department of Environmental Quality, and they changed the state act. So that just so you know that. So if you're interested in environmental review, think about what questions you want to ask, what are your concerns, and how they could be answered. So I would love to get some feedback on that. So trying to think if there's anything else, and I'm missing anything, Joel. I think those are sort of the big questions, just where we're at in the process. So.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest, I think a lot of people felt like they had missed their opportunity to voice their opinion. Yeah. And, that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that everybody understood, that you have not missed your opportunity to say what you need to say, and that we're not as far along as I think most people thought we were. Like, this is very early stage,
Where do,
so.
you go from here, to me, this, museum is not a thing that needs to be at Jockey Ridge. We already have our museum, and we have, the visitor center has just been.
Sure.
But the plans of this, museum pretty much overshadowed everything that we have put in the park, which was within the master plan.
Sure,
And
yeah.
the general management plan, and I mean, I've worked on all of those.
Yeah.
And I just don't see that, we could put a panel in the museum that they're putting together now of the Rogallo and Kitty Hawk kites and hang gliding, and, as well as putting there is an exhibit of Carolista alone, and she would be worthy of a museum dedicated to her as opposed to Rogallo, in my opinion, which I think highly of.
We've got the Save Our Sandies sign that's going to be right behind the main visitor contact
I
station.
say that, she gave it to me,
Yeah.
and I put it on the side of the wall.
They've actually worked on preserving it, so it's not going to.
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
gonna
I heard that.
deteriorate any further, so.
But I'm just, there's a lot of, it looks like that, this is basically a done deal, and we want to stop that. I do.
Well,
Um,
what I've heard, it does, to me, like, this is not close to a done deal, does not get started.
Yeah, I mean,
What are the terms that have been negotiated so far, or at least Chris?
Yeah, that was a question we were having, is there,
Yeah, so we don't have what we would do is work out a memorandum of agreement with them. And that would be the first step in the process, and that would say what we'd be responsible for, what they would be responsible for. And so we haven't even gotten to that point yet, so of negotiating back and forth, anything on that.
Will the general public like us be informed of what's going on? I mean, it's blindsided me. I was, I got kind of vested in interest.
Sure.
Jockey
Yeah.
Ridge. I didn't know anything, well, maybe I heard something 5 or 6 years ago, a little bit. But then all of a sudden, they're going to talk to the county commissioners and Nags Head commissioners and the tourist bureau, and, park people are not
Yeah.
involved in this. And I don't think that's right.
Well, I understand that, and I can't, what a private individual does is,
Yeah, I know that.
that's sort of their purview if they want to do that and garner support for it. But again, this group is, to me, our citizens group. These are the folks that you guys represent, the citizens of the area. You guys have that vested interest, the concerns and that. So, I mean, and the other question is, on your, George, are there, is it something that, and again, I just say this, and not that, and again, I'm not either way, but we have museums in the division, we have museums that, Mormont, for example, a separate museum from the visitor center that talks about indigenous people in the area. So we do have museums. We're part of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Part of our mission is education of the public. So does it fit? Yes. Is it right there? Is it that? And again, those are the questions that we're trying to get answered.
Are you negotiating the lease in advance of figuring this out?
No. I mean, those would all be questions that would have to be answered in the lease. So if part of the lease agreement would be to, and again, we got to be careful about this since my understanding, there's no funds for it. So to have a lease agreement without funds in place, I'm not sure. Again, that would be a question for.
I keep hearing about this meeting. Is there to negotiate the lease, that's coming up, or there's?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm meeting with you guys. I'm going to meet with Rogallo Foundation. They would like to meet with you to talk about these things. I would love to give them some comments from you and feedback.
Right.
Hey, these are the things that we'd like, that are
Right.
concerns.
Which comes first? You've got an MOU that we're talking about, which is, basically.
MOA, yeah. MOU civic with money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we do environmental studies? Do we look at our mission statements? Do we look at our master plans first before we enter into conversations about the MOA?
I think an MOA would spell out, to me,
the best thing to do is if you have concerns is spell them out up front. So that MOA would say, these are the questions we'd like answered before we move to, the next step.
Okay.
That's what my
I think that's
suggestion
what the
would be.
concerns are
Yeah.
here, is we want to make sure that we make smart choices.
Correct.
Does it fit with our mission statements?
Yep.
Does it support the park? I mean, these are all the questions, that's why we're all here.
And what are the impacts, I think George has articulated some of his concerns about not only impacts to the natural resources, but also visual impacts and impacts to visitation and parking, et cetera, those kinds of things. Those would be all things that we'd want to understand. Again, if we were doing it ourselves, those are things that questions that we would have to get answered, before in that planning process.
I for one, see, the natural resource and the Jockey's Ridge State Park as being a very large value. I mean, here, as we become more and more built out, Matt Walker with Milepost Magazine made a good point the other day, that's why we protect lands. And, we don't want to cave into development. And so I'm hopeful that, we have the opportunity to, everybody collectively,
Sure.
to
And
speak.
so far in our community, the public opinion has been shaped by a private foundation, an individual, and that's how we all heard about it. It wasn't put out to the public, and there's this, it seems to be this private foundation, kind of structuring this opinion, and that we thought was further along, and so
Sure.
it was alarming.
Well,
Yeah, felt a little blindsided.
yeah,
by
and
the
I
resolution.
certainly would apologize for that. I'm certain that was not our intention to try to do anything, under the radar. Again, questions that you have, we'd like answered too, so.
Well, what would benefit to the state park be to have this other museum built, kind of overshadowing what we have and worked so hard for 30, 40 years?
At least for when I look at it, and we can debate this, it does educate the public on an activity that's been there since the 70s, historical activity that's occurred there. And it also talks about the evolution, I think, in my understanding, reading their literature, that's all I can do, is the evolution of the glider and sort of its contributions to flight, et cetera. So,
Well, we used to, they moved, when they moved the concession building over to the park, where it should have been. I got to throw a few in there. But we would have, Bruce would come over there, Bruce Weaver was in charge of the hang glide stuff, and he would do a program 4 or 5 days a week, and he would explain that in our museum.
Sure.
Or in the visitor center meeting room. And that was good. I mean, we worked with them to try to explain that into it, but we also, we did these night hikes and Girl Scouts spending the night out there, and we did a lot of stuff that we still do. Well, not that I'm not exactly in there anymore, but
You're still part of the park.
my picture's in there somewhere. I was a little smaller, I had, brown hair, not gray. But, we just don't, I don't personally think that we need another museum. I mean, the Jockey's Ridge is there because people like her mother and they generated money and they went to the legislature and they spent a lot of time and effort and money getting it as a state park, and it was the natural resource that was the reason it was a state park, and it's part of the sand dune system from Virginia to south of here. And that's what's most important to me. I think highly of, I knew Francis Rogallo, and I thought he was a very intelligent man. I thought he was actually what I call a gentleman. And I'm not sure that he would be real happy about people trying to build a museum in his honor. And I don't think, there's other places to put this museum that deal with flight, like Wright Brothers and this thing they have in Kitty Hawk at the, I don't remember what it's called.
Monument to a century of flight.
Yeah, that, and, then Kitty Hawk has got a whole lot of room over there across the street. Take out a couple of storefronts and put a museum in there. They got property. We've got property that is used and educate the public and kids and anybody else that wants to come in and see what we have. And it tells the story of a living sand dune system.
I had a question. Robin had asked me for a few questions. She couldn't be here. Is this a paid or free lease? Is it negotiated price?
We haven't even gotten that. I assume it would be,
Is there a way, how do they arrive at the dollar value?
so, that is, that would be a good question. So that is done in the department. And so let's say we have a few areas where we have some open fields where we do hay cutting, and that's determined on that value. So I assume that somebody either in the property office would determine that value. Although, I'm not sure. It's sort of a catch-22 because there's also, a benefit of a building. They're also putting a value back into it. So
To a point.
no, I understand.
That building has to be maintained.
It has to be maintained, and I assume there'll be some sort of charge to get in, and so
we don't do that.
to pay for O&M.
But the
and
park
things
is
like that.
free.
Correct.
That's what makes it so great.
Yeah.
That was the best thing about having the Moon Rock
Yeah.
at Jockey Ridge State Park. There was a
Yeah.
lady actually came out there and said, "Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I didn't have the money to go to Wright Brothers, but I came here. It was
Sure.
for free." And
Yeah.
that was huge to me.
I don't want to get into that, my philosophies on that, but
I understand.
but I would say we do have other areas.
Tell
We
you
do
the
have other areas in Chimney Rock, etc., that are fee access, and
Right,
so.
The other thing is, she asked, does the park have authority to non-competitively lease land to a private entity? And where's the authority in North Carolina rules and codes, she's asked. Because who else did remember this? I mean, is it wide open? I mean, what do you like, what's next?
Do you believe like there is legislation that allows for leases on state land?
That was the question, yeah.
Yeah. And the reason why there was a, gosh, I can't remember what legislation, but anyway, there was some talk of possibly putting that in the, I think John Harris was the one who told me that they were talking about asking one of the representatives to put some legislation in, and his office responded back and said there's already legislation there to be able to do that.
Okay, well, that's what we're asking.
So,
All right.
so yeah, that,
And I can ask that question
Yeah.
from our attorneys and get that answer for you.
Well, if I might speak, Mr.
Sure.
Strong, I'm Ann-Cabell Baum. Carolista was my mom.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you. I meet you, sir. I don't know that anybody is against the museum per se, just the location that has been chosen. And that natural resource is for the people and not for private entities, leases of any kind. It was never intended that way. That's the reason it actually, the entire effort started because of development. Commercialization, whatever you want to call it. The ridge is there because of dedicated individuals here in this community and across the state that took time and effort and lots of money to make sure that everyone could enjoy it forever and ever and ever. And I put together a petition yesterday, 24 hours ago, and I asked people to sign it. Many people in this room. There are more than 420 signatures now against having any building development on Jockey's Ridge. The Rogallo Museum or whatever may come next. Because with the Rogallo Museum, and if that moves forward, there will be another suitor. And there will be someone else that wants to build something. And at least 420 people. I've printed 390 names. This is for you to take with you.
Thank you.
I'd love for you to share that with your boss and your boss's boss. And I have copies for anybody else who would like to have that, that say, no, this is not the location. There was no one not in support of the museum, just not on Jockey's Ridge State Park.
Just, one of my concerns is looking forward. I think we should be more concerned about losing the ridge as opposed to building something there in Jockey's Ridge State Park. I mean, we've lost how many feet? I mean, let me put it this way. In 5 years, there may be no hang gliding.
That's true.
That makes a moot point for a museum.
No, it doesn't.
I think it does. And on the second thought, if this place, if Jockey's Ridge was so important for this museum, then why wasn't it the first choice? Because it wasn't.
Can you elaborate on that?
I will another day.
Yes, I'm curious. There's some things I don't know.
They've been looking for a place to put this for a long time.
Yes.
20 years. I just think it's it's an easy landing spot. Doesn't cost $20 million to buy the land.
Convenient location too.
I'm sorry?
Convenient location.
Yes.
Can I?
Sure.
I'm a neighbor on the science side of the road. It sounds like to me that everybody's got questions about process, and the answers I'm hearing don't seem to be very clear. There doesn't really seem to be a process from what I'm listening to you, from Mr. Strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So explain your question a little.
Well, the
Process.
What's the process that this whole procedure has to go through? Is there an existing process?
Sure, I think I explained that a little bit at the beginning. So planning, we have multiple documents. When we don't have a particular project in a document.
So an individual just approaches you, or
Correct.
an individual group,
Yeah.
and there are rules for how that.
Well, that's what
is
this
dealt
what
with.
this group is here for, is to help us work through that process. This is what we call, friends group here, but park advisory, and they're here to advise us as to, we can't communicate with all the citizens in the area, and this is the group we use to.
So the park doesn't have a process except to come and ask their friends what they think about it.
In most cases, all these are already put into plans. This one just was not. Came to us and it wasn't in a plan, so that's why the process we have is to come to this group and get input.
We still have an advisory committee.
So on that note, since this is part of the Friends group, I think it's just really important to reiterate the fact that, we're here to support and enhance Jockey's Ridge as a significant geologic feature, which also includes, I think in the state parks also are supposed to protect these cultural resources, these natural resources. And I think that's a serious question that needs to be considered and answered, that developing this portion of land completely contradicts what the mission of this park is.
And they would also have to charge a fee to get in, so I think there's concern that donations that may come our way to help the park with their requests might decrease.
Great.
As people spend their money to get into another museum on the property.
But they eventually see the Friends of Jockey's Ridge.
Well, there'll be perception that they contributed to Jockey's Ridge.
Jockey's
Right,
Ridge,
but they're not.
It takes away a lot of funds from us. That way it takes away funds from the park.
Oh, there's so many things too, like
Yeah,
the overshadowing, what's the signage on the road gonna be like? The park is a small sign, they're gonna have a big sign. It could be Rogallo with a state park, a long way around.
Where does this stand right now as far as the studies that we have to do and the MOU? I mean, where does it stand right now? Is somebody going to start looking into building it or trying to make it go through, or is it?
Well,
how can you stop it right now?
Well, I mean, if there's never an agreement, then it doesn't happen. Right?
Yeah, but
Since there's no
tell them
agreement.
not to sign an agreement.
But we haven't signed an agreement.
No.
We never signed an agreement, it doesn't happen.
Let's.
Well, you asked how it wouldn't happen. I'm just trying to.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, it's gonna be easy,
you're
George.
saying you're not gonna sign the
Easy,
agreement?
yeah, it's gonna be easy.
What's that? Oh, no, don't say that. I'm
Brian
just-
doesn't sign any
I don't sign any agreements, but I'm saying how it doesn't happen if the agreements aren't signed. That's kind of, that's just, I'm just the logical.
Now, who goes next in the process to start?
Well, I guess maybe, and I think maybe getting some, I mean, if you guys want to do this, what would be helpful to us is get all these things sort of on paper to us. That would be great, we'd appreciate that.
Well, we'll do it.
Yeah.
Do you have a timeline for doing that, or what, like, because we keep hearing these meetings, the lease negotiation meeting.
Yeah.
Like, what is that lease negotiation meeting? I mean, it's-
Brian's supposed to meet with John, or
Yeah, 20th, October 20th.
Yeah, and he's asked to meet with me, so, I'm gonna, you guys
That's his
meet
job.
with us, and I meet with people. Part of my job is I have a balancing act. We are, part of the mission is to protect the resources, but we also have to provide outdoor recreation and access. And that's the biggest challenge is how do you balance those two and making sure we do a good job. We put in trails, we build visitor centers, we build, bathhouses, we build campgrounds. All of those things go into parks because it's, like you said, it's the citizens and they want to access these things. So we have to balance those things and we have to ask those questions. Is this appropriate? Is it not? And we have to look to balance those things. And we look to you guys to help us make those wise decisions about how to do this because I always say I make decisions not for myself, but for, generations. So we've got to be careful about how we do those things and that those are the best decisions in the long term. And what do people want to see, so.
No development.
But I would think you make your mind up whether you want to do it or not before you start entertaining a lease. Like, I don't.
Well, I mean, like I said, there's no lease, there's no draft lease, there's no,
So it's his job.
we're
to
led to
listen.
believe.
It's-
You gotta start somewhere before you can say that.
it's my job to meet with people who have interest in doing
Oh,
things.
so the
in the
lease
park.
application is just the idea application.
Yeah, it's not like we have a process, it's done internally, so, yeah.
So you talked about the memo of agreement as kind of being the first step, is that correct? Because I don't understand why you would enter into some type of memo of agreement with, and go through that process at all if it's not necessarily, like if our friends group, which is speaking for the people,
Sure.
says it's something we don't want. Why would you go through the memo of agreement?
Well, and again, if that's, again, I'm not making those decisions, so I'll bring these comments back. But
Right.
it would be, say, we don't like it, it's too big. Okay. Is there an option? Would it be to shrink it down, put it in a different location on the park? Make it, what would, so that's what we would talk about. Hey, we think it's too tall, we think it's going to be seen from the, what would you do to do that? Same thing we do when we meet a lease agreement for anybody else. The first step is to say, what are you going to do? What are we going to do? How's this going to work? So, I mean.
So the first step is not to ask whether it's good for the park or not.
Well, that's what I'm here today.
Right.
I understand that, but you just said the first step is to talk about who's going to do what. It's not, what Kohler was getting at was, at some point, there would be a determination of consistency before you went forward with you mentioned all the plans.
Right.
You never sort of mentioned when you take that lease and compare it to the plans and say, wait a minute, is this consistent with the plans or not?
And the public gets notified that there's a process underway.
Right. Get more confusion.
Yeah, we're just like, okay, what goes first, the cart or the horse?
Or the donkey, there's people always want to rent donkeys and ride them.
Yeah. But, yeah, that was a concern. But I understand, I'm getting a clearer vision now of where state parks are headed, that there are lease agreements that happen multiple times throughout many parks, it seems, in the North Carolina system. And so there is a place to park. So, are they, the other thing is, are they competitive? I mean, suppose we wanted to lease land in place of that, what happens then? I mean, is there competitive leases, is there?
Yeah, I mean, we typically, I wouldn't say, we have leases all over the place, but it
Right.
might be, some of them are just
Right, I
very
understand.
small. I mean, we're not talking about,
I understand.
we lease out, 250,000 acres, we lease
Right,
out 100,000 of it. No.
Right.
Probably the acreage numbers is less than 1,000, but it's
Gotcha.
here, there, or, and again, there's something, there's also a benefit to it. We always make sure
Right.
there's a benefit to the lease.
Right.
So that's sort of one of the nexus for us, is what's the benefit? So, we look at this lease, well, what would be the benefit?
Gotcha.
So,
Because our parks, as compared to a lot of parks, I don't know the acreage, how big we are to other parks, but it seems like anything else we would put in there would decrease the size of our park exponentially compared to other parks across North Carolina.
Yeah, and that's sort of my question about this is, I mean, if we say no more development ever in the park, that might be a bit of a challenge if we ever want to put in a barracks or seasonal personnel, or, you know what I mean? Those are some things that are in the planning process that are in there that, you know what I mean, that we got to be careful that are already planned. And that's, so,
Absolutely.
yeah, I just want to make sure that it's not like we're never going to build anything else again.
No, I understand that
Yeah.
completely. I think what you were hearing and
Sure.
what you were taking back
Gotcha.
to Rob is this.
There's a
friends
large
group
concern.
is-
Gotcha.
This whole friends group, maybe except for one, is not in support of the Rogallo Museum being built on Jockey
Gotcha.
Ridge.
Well, that's great.
And they're talking, people think we're talking about building on top of Jockey Ridge, isn't that crazy? It wouldn't stay there very long.
There would be a Christmas tree up there.
We've had that tree up there for like 35 years, so. And they put it down quite a bit.
And last year was a bad year. Last year we got tore up horribly.
Yeah, my last concern is just viability of a nonprofit being in there, running a building. There's a history of the other banks of private, public enterprises going south. What happens then? We're stuck with a building. And of course, the other concern which you hear here is that, my concern is the Friends Jockeys Ridge Group, and to keep it viable, and to keep it financially stable for years to come. This will put a big dent in us. It could possibly cause us to cease to exist. in my mind.
Bottom line here is the people in this room, and most people in Nags Head and general vicinity are not in favor of putting a museum in Jockey Ridge. And we're not against the museum, we're against the place that they want to put it. We think it's wrong, it's not conducive to what the point was of making Jockey Ridge State Park. And like I said, the plans I've seen for this building it's a beautiful building, but it's not, it's going to cut the wind currents and offshore. It's huge, and you can set it on top of the visitor center and the museum that we got, and it overshadows it from what I've seen from these pictures. What we want is just status quo, basically. If you want to explain about Rogallo, do it in a panel in our museum, and that's the way it has been before. And I think that's an answer to, instead of spending all this millions of dollars and giving away a free lease is, you see, that's crazy. That's, you're asking for trouble.
Is it a free lease?
Yes, free lease, a lease with no payment,
No compensation?
Right.
Is that what we're talking about?
For the amount of dollars of what land's costing.
Wow, we just got to my bottom line, really, that's it?
That raises another question. I'm sorry, but
Go
I'll get my tongue as hard as I
Well, hang
can.
on, let me just get an answer to
The
this
state-
question. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, again, there's no lease. Just wanted to say that. There's no lease agreement, so there's no agreement on what that would look like or what the payment would be.
I did read in one of the documents, or one of the letters.
is a
Does
more.
that proposal?
I do.
The proposal they're proposing
Free
is to, a free lease,
Yeah.
but it's got a $7 million building on it. So,
Which they don't.
I understand that, but, you know, it's an amenity on it. So that's what I'm saying. So, you know, free,
For the dollar value of what land costs in the Outer Banks,
gift.
there would be, that land would probably be worth a lot more than $7 million. I can guarantee you that. I can also guarantee you that if developers on Outer Banks knew they could get a free lease at a state park,
Well,
you'd have a line out the door. Seriously.
Yeah, in the private real estate sector, I mean, that's insane.
That's a ton of money.
Yeah, for something that's in a state park, a natural resource, tallest end on the East Coast, you know, what we got, 1.5 million people come and visit every.
so,
every
you know,
year.
I mean, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far, but
I got you, I understand.
you can't take property out of a state park and use it for a non-state park purpose
I understand.
without replacement. That's the LWCF 6F boundary. So, you know, so there is a park purpose. It's being used as a museum, which is something we do in the division. So be careful about saying, well, just be here and let somebody in. And then you've got, you know, the State Nature and Historic Preserve, you've got the DMP, you've got a number of protections on the property that keep it from any of those things without a replacement property or going through the General Assembly, you know, 3/5 vote. So there are protections. So, you know, we can't just say, we think it'd be great if you put a high-rise here on Soundside
Well,
Road.
let's even talk about us. I'm
Yeah.
sure that a lot of developers would come up with great ideas that would be environmentally sound and educational, and would love to have their idea
I'm
put for
thinking
free in the
Sugar
state park.
Kingdom, maybe Chick-fil-A,
No,
pickleball courts would be good,
No, we're not going there. We're not going there.
wings.
Sure.
No,
And again, non-for
For free.
purposes, yeah.
yeah, it's non-park purposes. though.
No.
But I want to thank you for your time. Yeah. Wait, did you have one
I
question?
did.
Go ahead.
The state property office owns all this property on Sunnyside Road. What's the process by which the property that the state of North Carolina owns, but it's not part of the park, then becoming part of the park? Is that a legislative process? Is that?
So, yeah, when we purchase property, when the state purchases property, it's allocated to the North Carolina Division of Parks and Recreation. So all the property, state park property is allocated. Now, every 2 years, we put it in what's called the State Nature and Historic Preserve. And that's an act that allows for further protection on it.
So the property that is owned on the north side of Sunnyside Road, which is listed in the Dare County Tax Office as state property office, that's not part of the state park because it's
Yeah, I mean,
outside.
what would be helpful
No,
if
it's
you,
not outside the
if
park,
if
it's
you,
in the lease agreement with, the town of Nags Head.
Well,
No, he's talking about like the park housing area.
There's 25 lots on the north side of Sunnyside Road. I mean, 100 feet by 200 feet. How many acres that is? On map.
and you're saying that's not
It's
owned by
part
the
of the park.
state?
It's owned by the state, but
There's
it's
a
not
process
part of the
Carolina,
Jockey State Park. So, how,
It's
what
not part of the
process?
dedicated
Can we
nature
lease
preserve.
those?
I think what he's saying is it's not part of the dedicated nature preserve.
Correct.
And there's certain sections in the park itself that is not included in the dedicated nature preserve. The property in the dedicated nature preserve has to go through the state historic office.
Well, no,
Right.
it goes through, yeah, I mean.
Heritage,
Natural heritage, but yeah,
I'm sorry.
it's dedicated under the rules of dedication. And there are certain things that can and cannot be done under the rules of dedication. So you can do pretty much primitive camping or trails. Outside of that, we can do things that would be appropriate for park purposes.
Okay.
But it's still starting the state park system, and it's still allocated to the division.
So if I dug into that chain, it would show that that's part of the park. It's just not part of the natural preserve part of the park.
Correct. And usually there's criteria for that. So that doesn't include any of the facilities, it doesn't include any areas that are typically highly disturbed. those areas where there's a house, where there's, any of those things. But the dune, et cetera, and that all areas in the dedicated nature preserve.
So there's two.
It's layers, it's like
Two
an onion.
layers, yeah, two
Oh, there's
layers.
more than one, there are two
Yeah, more
layers.
than one.
There's probably at least 6 on the park.
Okay.
6 different layers of rules and regulations,
Well,
so,
that's interesting, thanks.
well, it's good.
Yeah.
That's why parks stay parks.
Does the zoning apply?
It's a state, it's state.
So state ownership trumps zoning.
Correct. What we do is we go through the state property office and they handle all of the, things that would be normally handled by local folks, like inspections and all that stuff is handled by the Department of Insurance and Department of Construction. DOI, DOC. I'm sorry.
No, this is great. I mean, I said, awesome. This is really good. It's in education.
Yeah.
Which is what we asked for.
Sure.
I was going to say something real quick if I
Sure, go ahead.
I'm Andy Garman with the town of Nags Head, and we, how are you?
Good. I feel like we've met before.
I appreciate being able to come to
Oh, yeah.
and listen.
Thanks for being here.
So, at our board meeting this past month, the Rogallo Foundation asked if they could come and give a presentation, and then they also asked if they could have the board consider a resolution in support of the project. And so the board said, let's go ahead and have the presentation, but let's hold off on the resolution
Sure.
for now.
Sure.
And I think part of the reason for that is they wanted to listen to the community and get the feedback, primarily from this group, but also from others. And so I think that's what they were hoping to do. And,
Yeah.
and they got letters and comments at the meeting. Several of the folks here spoke at the meeting. And I think we forwarded those comments on to y'all at this point. And,
Did you get those?
The comments,
the comments from the meeting, did you get the letters and comments?
yeah, they were sent to.
Okay, good.
Can you make sure, I would love to hear that feedback, especially that's another group that
And
has
the,
feedback. That'd be fabulous.
The Nags Head board may take a position on this at some point.
Sure.
And so I'll share that
Okay.
when they do.
Thank
And
you.
I know that the Dare County Commissioners passed a
Correct.
resolution in support of it, but I'm not aware that they spoke to anybody in Nags Head about that. Just
Or the
to
friend.
clarify that. Anyway,
It's perfect. I appreciate that, Andy. Thanks for bringing that up.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's what spurred us on.
Yeah.
I just found it kind of strange that the presentation was made to Dare County Board of Commissioners, and then 2 seconds later, they whipped out a resolution in favor, and I'm like, did you guys write that during the presentation, or was that what was the plan? Just wanted to put it in.
Well, I appreciate the time to come and speak, and like I said, if you can put something together.
That's moving forward, what we'll do is
Yeah.
we'll get all our ideas together, we'll get together as a board from this meeting,
That's
put
perfect.
everything down in writing, and we'll send it to you.
Yeah, that's right.
30, 60 day timeframe. Like, we gotta get together again.
I know. I think
Takes a
we
while.
can, I think we can get ourselves together a little quicker than that. With this, we're gonna have to. Yeah, there's urgency. We're waiting to get a position heard as quickly as possible. But once again, I appreciate you
Oh, yeah.
coming here, man. I know, I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Continue on, it's 425, 427, 428, 428, 429,
Okay.
431.
Are you?
She is her mother's dog.
Here, a second here, I have the motion to adjourn the meeting.
Jeannie shared it in the email today.
Second,
Whatever.
meeting is adjourned.